Hello, Tolkien geeks, and welcome back to the Voice of Geekdom podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dan, and today's guest is a good friend of mine who I've known since probably before I started the channel, Mr. John Webster of John Webster Film. Say hello.
Hey, everyone. I just first and foremost want to thank you for having me on, Dan. We've been talking about this for a while, and I'm glad we could finally make it happen. As Dan just said, I have a channel called John Webster Film. I also co-host on Here Be Dragons. I'm a big, huge Tolkien geek, especially for the films. I say that because I know I've seen the films more than I've read the books. So, so I'm just excited to come on here and talk some Lord of the Rings with you.
Yeah, I wouldn't know which I've seen, which I've done more, read the books or seen the films, because I read the books before, years before I watched the films, and I lost count before I ever got to the films, and I've long since lost count of how many times I've seen the films as well. So it's like
for me, everything kind of meshes together because I read the books probably, as far as the Lord of the Rings, like in the year before the first film came out.
Right.
So like all the publicity material was coming out at the same time that I was reading. So I think I was like picturing all the actors, as I was reading the book, and it was just one long build up until I finally saw the movie. I was annoying my coworkers.
Right.
Like to death. They were sick and tired of hearing about Lord of the Rings.
And these are your favorite movies of all time, like by a clear distance from what I can make out.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've described them in the past as life-changing for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the way that I imagine people felt when they saw Star Wars in 1977. That kind of life-altering thing.
That's good. You've taken your first step into a larger world.
I'm a huge film nerd, and I feel like I learned pretty much everything I know about film from watching all those documentaries and everything. It was like my film school, essentially.
Okay, so big Lord of the Rings fan and big fan of the Peter Jackson adaptations. What do you think are the kind of the big challenges that they faced in adapting the Lord of the Rings?
Just the fact that nobody thought it could ever be done. They talked a lot about how the time was never right to do something like this because the technology hadn't caught up, and the fact that how would you even like script it too, because the
technology is just the start of the problems, really.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing began where I think that they weren't even aware of the possibility that they could do like a 3-film adaptation. The idea from the early days when they were dealing with Miramax was doing a 2-film adaptation, which seemed ambitious enough. But then they would have had to lose so much, and which people would still argue that they lost more than they would have wanted to. So
I do argue that at times, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but
so, and I'm sure lots of people have heard the sort of, it's almost like a mythological tale by this point of when they when Miramax told them that now you need to cut this down to one movie, and they were given license to basically go shop the film around, probably because Miramax didn't think that anyone would bite. But then when they sat down with the executives at New Line, and they just said, why would anybody make 2 movies out of this? This is 3 films, clearly. I mean, just imagine the odds of something like that happening. It's one of those things where you actually have faith in the movie industry every once in a while, and the fact that they got to do it that way.
Okay, good. And so I wanted to start out by talking about some of the big thematic changes that we see in the movies. because there are. I mean, I think you can certainly make an argument that the movies are true to the feeling of the books in most respects. People's mileage on this varies a lot, but
yeah, I think everybody has like their own read on the books. I can say for myself, especially having like before the films came out and like right after I had finished reading the books, I saw the Ralph Bakshi film, which I know a lot of. It has its own fan base, but I always felt like it didn't feel like Lord of the Rings to me.
no.
And these films just nailed the spirit of the books for me. So.
Yeah, I think in most respects that's true. I think one of the big differences I see is the nature of the ring in books versus film. And I don't know how you see this issue, but the ring seems to have that much more power over characters in the movie versus the book. The ring is particularly important, and you get a sense of its doom and its kind of its place in the story of Middle Earth as history is unraveled, and you get a sense of fate playing out. And Gandalf says it, and Elrond says it during the council in the books. In the films, it seems to be, you get the speech from Gandalf midway through the first film, which is a speech that actually happens much earlier in the books, which is, one of those changes that's, all over the place in the movie adaptations, is conversations and dialogue happening in different places, or sometimes coming out of the mouths of different characters. But you get Gandalf kind of coming to the realization that things have come together for a reason. But at the beginning of the movie, he seems to be all a panic, and it's a big shock to him that this has happened, and he's discovered that the One Ring is in the Shire all this time. And book Gandalf is very kind of unflappable and deals with it very kind of with a sort of sense of contemplation, I would say.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with the nature of the cinema and the fact that this is you're dealing with a 3-hour film and you want to keep the pace going. And I know New Line had told them that they wanted roller coaster rides of films. And so I think it's the same reason why you don't have, like years and years of a gap between
the 17-year gap between Bilbo's party and the conversation.
Yeah, it's because
with
the whole thing with the films is that these events are unfolding very fast, and there's a real sense of urgency. And with the books, it's an entirely different thing because, as you said, there's a 17-year gap where Gandalf is kind of, doing his research and figuring out what's going on, and time is allowed to pass, and that's just not something that they were going for in the films. And I don't know if, I suppose you could argue that somehow you could make it work, but I do think they made the right decision as far as when people go to the cinema to see a movie, they do want to be taken along for a ride, and so I think that they,
I think that it works. Yeah. It works differently for different genres. That kind of slower pacing might work for a different kind of genre, but that's not what they were going for with this. They were going for action-packed adventure.
Yeah.
One of my bullet points that I had here was that 17-year gap and the narrative difficulties that presents, because we get the ring, and then we get Gandalf's kind of panicked state, and then he rushes off and comes back, and then he he pounces on Frodo in the dark and nearly gives Frodo a heart attack in that one scene. Is it secret? Is it safe? And you think, Gandalf, what are you trying to do here? And so the ring, it's an emergency in the movies, whereas it feels more like an epoch in history in the books. I would say it feels like the end. It feels like the Third Age coming to an end, basically. which is what it is.
Yeah, and once again, it's this whole thing of increasing the urgency and danger, and we see that also with the sort of impact that the ring has on various people in the story.
Yeah.
In the books, there's even some people who are able to resist it. You know,
well, Frodo himself resists the ring for much longer in the books. I feel like it's really once he gets to the cracks of doom that he gives in, because he's in the center of Sauron's power, and there's just no way for him to actually resist at that point, because it's just the sheer brute force of the magic of the ring.
And that's once again, you know, the book is this massive tome where, you know, you can get inside the characters' heads, and the story is allowed to, you know, like a lot of people probably would be surprised if they haven't read the books, and they've only seen the films, how sort of leisurely paced the books can be. Because the films are such, you know, go you know, especially if you're watching the theatrical version.
You hear that from people all the time, is, you know, the question of all the landscape description that happens in the books from people who've, you know, watched the films first.
But the thing is, with that increased pace of the films and the sense of urgency and danger, the natural byproduct of that is that, you know, you want to place your central character in like constant danger, and part of that is that the ring is even more of, you know, a more constant oppressing force that the film is really driving home. And as a result, you can't have moments like where, you know, I mean, even if they had Tom Bombadil, and, you know, you can't have him just like tossing the ring around like it's nothing. Because if you're trying to show that it's doing this much constant damage to your main character, that kind of flies in the face of that. And it's the whole reason why the Faramir section is completely different, is because once again, if they're showing that the ring has that much of a hold on Frodo and is that much of a threat constantly, then you can't have Faramir just say, I would not take this thing.
I've gone back and forth on the Faramir question a lot, actually, because I do understand that change, because it does feel like an odd outlier in the books too, where he just literally, he learns that the One Ring is in his presence, and then his first reaction is to say, but I don't want it. You know, I'm above all this, and you obviously you're on an important mission, and I wouldn't dare claim the One Ring. And he has that kind of instant heroic reaction that just seems to fly in the face of everything we've learned about this ring.
But somehow it works better in the books than I think it would have in the films, because we look on Faramir, this isn't a very admirable, you know, thing, and I don't know, just because of the way things are described, and that's the thing, when you're able to take your time and you're telling a tale with words rather than with, you know, visuals and editing and, you know, and all that stuff, it's different. You can convey things, and I think it does work in the books, and while simultaneously saying that I think they made the right choice in the movies. Although I will say I think it comes across better in the extended cut.
Yes,
I think
they made indisputably.
I think they made some, even though, like, I love these films unconditionally, but I will say probably one of the big flaws I think was removing, you know, some of Faramir's character development in the second film and even in the third film. So
I would argue that with the Faramir changes, that it's a good example of the kind of butterfly effect of changing things, because you change Faramir, and I think that's a big part of the reason why Denethor is so radically different to the books. And Denethor, I think, doesn't work in the films, personally. It's one of the big problems I have with the films is Denethor's whole character, because I've watched you know, the films many times with people who haven't read the books, and I always get this reaction from people is this guy a lunatic? What is wrong with him? When it comes to Denethor, and it's the butterfly effect of changing something and then something else changing.
I mean, I do get that. I think it works. I mean, in fact, I think it works rather well. I just think that you have to divorce it from the storyline of the books. I think it's very easy to have issues with it because of all the stuff about Denethor's character that's pulled away. But what I liked about it is it's this story of this really this dysfunctional family in the midst of this larger story, and I find it really emotionally compelling. And yeah, the Denethor of the films is, loony.
He's nuts.
He's not been a good person like prior to the death of his son. He's a jerk, through and through. And I think that the grief of Boromir's death pushes him over the edge, and to the point where in the third film, he is quite, split from reality. And you can either like that or not, but I actually think it works quite well. And I absolutely love John Noble's performance.
I have no issues with the acting. I think he's done, as a good a job as it could be expected. I struggle to understand his motivations. I think you're right that is what they're going for. There is, the death of Boromir. Certainly, we've had all the memes about the death of Boromir, and Denethor was kind of like favorite son versus Faramir.
Well, and it's clear that like even before Boromir dies, he hates Faramir. Like it's that's not something that just crops up. We're shown in that flashback that he has nothing but distaste for the younger son, and so I don't know. I do think it works, and I think the performance is brilliant. But at the same time, I get why people don't like it, because you're losing like some major influence, story elements from the book that explain why he's having this break from from reality and all that stuff. So I get it. I just think it's a different thing. I think it's really showing this terrible relationship that these three members of this family have, and we can a lot of people, I think, probably identify with really bad relationships that so in a way, in the scheme of this larger story, it's almost taking this relationship between a father and his sons down to this this base human level that doesn't have any outside, it's not influenced by outside forces. It's just like these three people who have this terrible relationship, and everything that's happening has just amplified that.
Book Denethor has a kind of grace to him that,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But he's psychologically complex and interesting. He's actually, I think he's a wonderful character in the books.
And I will say that I would have really loved to see John Noble get to play that version of Denethor. So.
But in the films, the other family connection that I would sort of draw a parallel with that is Aragorn and Arwen and Elrond, and that kind of family unit there. And this is another example, I think, of the butterfly effect, is the changes to Aragorn's character to make him have more of a hero's journey, to make him a reluctant hero in the movies versus the ready-made hero that's, the chosen one of the books, who is fated to take the crown, and and he knows that he is, and he knows that that's his destiny and that's his road ahead of him.
Which I remember having a great conversation with. This is going to go in a random direction, but I had a great conversation with my television production teacher back when the films came out. I was still in high school, and actually he was both my TV production teacher and people will gasp at this, my science fiction teacher, which we actually did have a sci-fi class.
You had a science fiction class.
Yeah, which I think only existed because of him, because he wanted to teach it. But we had great conversations, like before we even started talking about Lord of the Rings, about how the kind of stories and characters that we see on screen changes over time, and how as time has moved along, we become more and more fixated on our love of the reluctant hero. And so I remember after I had seen the films and I was talking to him about it, I was like, the only thing that kind of surprised me was how they changed Aragorn's character, because in the books he's so sure of himself. He has the sword. He's, immediately says,
and he's always described as tall and upright as well. And Aragorn in the films is constantly bowing to everybody.
But I said this to him, and he said, well, what do we like? We like reluctant heroes, and that's I think why Aragorn was changed, because at the time when Tolkien was writing the story, not only, speaking of the time in which he was writing, but the kinds of stories that he was influenced by, it made sense that Aragorn was this, upright figure who was proudly proclaiming who he was, showing off the broken sword and declaring that he is the heir of Elendil, and all that
you say the time Tolkien was writing, he was writing in the 1950s, but some of it was in the 1940s. But he in his mind was writing a 17th century heroic romance, and that's why you've got characters like Book Aragorn being the way they are.
Whereas movie audiences of today or 20 years ago would be more inclined to root for someone who follows, that tradition of the reluctant hero, someone who, doesn't believe in themselves, but over the course of their trials and their journeys then rises to the occasion and becomes that great hero. So once again, I don't know if the book accurate Aragorn would have worked or not, but I think that it's brilliant what we got on screen. And once again, got to give all the props in the world to Viggo Mortensen, because I love his performance, and I remember just being really annoyed when he didn't get a nomination for Two Towers, which I think he drives that film so much, and so I love his. I'm not going to surprise anybody by going on and on about how much I love the performances in these movies.
But anyway, should we get stuck into the three films and kind of go through? No, we're not going to go through everything, but go through some of the big kind of changes from film.
Oh, we could if you wanted. I'm game. But yeah.
So we talked about the 17-year gap, so I won't sort of go into too much detail on that one. But one of the first changes that I see and we've talked about this before on your channel actually, from book to film in the first film is actually the very first scene, the prologue scene, the War of Last Alliance. There's a character there that's omitted in the films, the character of Gil-galad.
Which actually, if you squint,
is in there as an extra, and I know that they shot extra footage there as well. Before you say it, and you do see the spear. You do see Aeglos. I think it's called Aeglos.
And it's actually really funny, because for the longest time, well, not the longest time, but at least for a number of times that I went to go see this in the theater, I really thought that when we saw Gil-galad, with his spear and stuff, I thought that was Elrond for the longest time, because you don't see his face very clearly, and he's not, there's really no other major shots of him, and it's never said that, oh, that's Gil-galad. So
I think it was years later I realized that was supposed to be Gil-galad. Círdan is also there in the books, we're told, as well, and he's present in the scene where Isildur goes up to Mount Doom with Elrond. So that obviously they've cut things for the sake of brevity there, which is it's fine. But the big change there is that in the books, it's quite clear that Sauron has already been defeated by Gil-galad and Elendil combined, and he's already pretty much or at least his body is dead, it's lifeless, and Isildur is basically looting the corpse, as it were. Whereas obviously in the movie we get that dramatic scene with the slash of this broken sword, and
oh, that's right, we did have conversation about this thing.
And this is where we get that slow motion hand coming towards the camera, and I always think, Sauron, why are you doing this? Like, I don't understand why you're. And when we had the conversation at the time about the power that Sauron has to burn people, because we do know from the books that he uses a power of heat to kill Gil-galad, I think. Yeah, Gil-galad, with the power of his burning hand. Which, if in the prologue scene, if they'd had Sauron's hand light up a little bit and it was clear that he was going to use some sort of sorcery to burn Isildur there on the ground, I'd have no problems with that scene. But the way that it's shot, it's just like, why is Sauron, what is he going to do? Was he going to pick Isildur up by his hair, or how do you read that scene? How do you pass it?
Basically that it's, and I think I said as much when we had this discussion before, that it's like, the whole point of this entire prologue is to convey a large amount of history in such a very short amount of time. So I think that is the most expedient way of getting Isildur to cut the ring off, and it's visually just compelling. See, I've never thought about the logic of it, because it's just like this, it's showing the ring, his hand is reaching out. I think if this were a longer sequence and we were getting into the details of the battle and stuff, then it wouldn't be as simple as that. It's just the fact that everything goes by so fast that I've never really given it that much thought, at least until our previous conversation. Which, by the way, this is a good time to say, if you guys want to hear that, a very lengthy discussion on that, go ahead and check out our stream on Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, do you warning though, you do need some time on your hands, because it's a very long stream. I think that was the shortest one, of the Fellowship of the Ring one. We spent about as much time as the actual running length of the movies discussing them on John's channel.
Well, and I've said that I'm actually quite sure that those streams did as well as they did view-wise, because people thought that they were clicking on the actual movies because of how long the streams were.
Could be, yeah. I mean, I'd have to look at your analytics to see whether that was true, but I'll have the links for those in the description below. So do check that out, and do subscribe to John Webster Film.
But yeah, I will acknowledge that I think visually it works if you're just doing a quick, if you're just trying to get through and hit all the key points. But I will also say that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Sauron to that. It's that's where all your power is. The dude's got a sword. Why are you reaching out your hand towards him like that?
Yeah, I mean, he could just stomp on him. That's all he needs to do. He doesn't need to reach his hand out. But
But
anyway,
I will say I really like, again, I do like what it does visually. It's that whole sequence has kind of a rhythm to it. I like seeing Sauron, and even though it doesn't make a lot of sense, the way he reaches out his hand, and then Isildur, the way the camera focuses on his face, he's just it's this last gasp of, I've got to try something, and swinging the sword. I like the way it's all filmed and cut together. Even
it has a mythic feel that you can kind of, you can almost view that scene like it's a kind of unreliable narrator thing. You know, we get when we get to the scene in Rivendell later on with the sword and Boromir and Aragorn have that conversation, and we get that wonderful painting, which I think is a John Howe painting, isn't it? You can picture that kind of scene being the kind of not necessarily reliable history potentially.
Yeah, and yeah, it's almost like this moment is that, is that painting brought to life, basically. And yeah, I agree. It's got, and with Galadriel narrating, it is like you're being told a story. So I think that's,
of course, Elrond himself was there, so it should be accurate. But there's me with my logic again. So yeah, it's a fairly minor change, but it's a big kind of sticking point in my head anyway. And then so we move on, and we get the kind of the party scene, which is almost exactly from the books. I think it's very, very similar to the books. They leave out some details that you get on the page, but it's pretty much event-wise, it's almost exactly the same.
Yeah, and jumping back to the subject of the prologue, for a while this was simply the opening of the film. They were going to open like the book does, with Bilbo's party, but then they decided rather than dropping information like throughout the film, they'd rather like clue people in right at the beginning.
Yeah, I would like to see that draft with all that exposition like littered throughout the rest of the movie. Because I don't know if that would have worked.
Yeah, which is why you get in the extended cut this beautiful, almost like a second prologue, introducing hobbits and the Shire and everything, because
which actually quite closely mirrors the concerning hobbits prologue of the book.
Yeah, I remember when I saw the extended cut for the first time and watching that sequence, I was like, oh my god, this is beautiful. It's just like straight out of Tolkien, and it's showing all, and of course you get more of Howard Shore's beautiful, concerning hobbits music, and it's beautiful.
And don't you want to just move into the Shire in that moment?
Yeah.
So, and then we get the kind of disturbing scene with Bilbo and Gandalf, which is, again, I think it's pretty close to the books. And then so we get to the 17-year gap, and as we've already discussed this a little bit, and it does change the pace of things, but it does make me question some of Gandalf's decisions during some of these scenes, particularly actually a bit later on when Gandalf leaves the Shire, because he's heading off to go and speak with Saruman in the movie. And so what they cut there to explain is Radagast. We get Radagast's involvement in the book, and we don't hear about it until much later on, because in the book, Gandalf he disappears, and then we don't get it until we get to the Council of Elrond, and we get all that exposition later on. But it does make me question Gandalf's decision making in the movies, because Gandalf kind of rides off in a hurry, and he says, "I must speak with Saruman, the head of my order. He is both wise and powerful." Blah blah blah. But in the book, there is a kind of rationale there where Gandalf has heard rumors of servants coming up, and Saruman is offered to help, and he sent a message via Radagast, and he's fooled Radagast into doing so, and there's a kind of rationale there. But I can't. That's another thing that I can't pass in the movies, is Gandalf's decision to leave at that moment.
Well, it's one of those things where Gandalf does go to Orthanc, to speak to Saruman, so you have to get him there. But again, the pace and the tempo of the film, they're not going to take time to introduce this side character, Radagast, who never appears again in the Lord of the Rings films. And so what's the most expedient way to do that? Say that, Gandalf, says he needs to, confer with, the head of his order. And it's just a very quick way of getting Gandalf to go off in that direction. He doesn't have the reasoning that he has in the books, but that's just a consequence of having to cut things out and move things along. It's the reason is because he has to get there. so they have to come up with some kind of device for why he goes. And
well, I'd say that they don't come up with a device, but that's that's my kind of lack of being able to justify it. But I guess in the moment you don't really question it because you just feel the action moving along. And
well, the thing is, I don't really see that it's an issue. Like, I think he would want to, with everything going on, I think Gandalf would naturally want to confer with Saruman, who is supposed to be like the most powerful of the wizards. He's
and he's the expert on the rings as well.
Yeah, and so unless he suspected, Saruman, which he doesn't at that point, then I don't really know that there would be much reason for him not to do that. But then I also see like the problem with that also is that because of how much everything's sped up in the movies, then you're also thinking, well, Frodo's in immediate danger rather than in the books where, maybe Gandalf doesn't, thinks if he leaves early enough, he'll be fine on the road by himself. But within the context of the movies, you're like, no, like the ring wraiths, they're coming right now, although he perhaps doesn't necessarily know that yet, but he knows that there's immediate danger nonetheless. And so, I think you can, it's just one of those things where it's what you were talking about, the butterfly effect. It's like you make changes, and so it makes you ask, well, why then are they doing this? But at the end of the day, the story has to get from point A to point B, and so I think there's also a lot of like the movie's moving so fast. You kind of hope that maybe your audience won't be asking these questions in the moment while they're watching, and they'll just
I don't think I did the first time in, and they're trying to have a box office success. They're not trying to make a perfect representation of the book. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to turn this into a debate, but it does make me ask questions.
I do think it's
films many times.
Yeah, it's a consequence of taking like events in the book that are allowed to play out over a much longer time and condensing them down to now. So it works for me, but your mileage will vary.
And when we get down to Isengard, we get the wizard duel, which is a big difference as well, because we don't really see that kind of display of power from Saruman in the books. We get that whole scene kind of relayed to us by Gandalf in the Council of Elrond, which is much longer in the books, much longer in the books,
much longer.
A lot of Lord of the Rings books fans don't like that chapter because of the length of it and the amount of talking. I love it, but that's me for you.
Yeah, I struggled with it the first time I read the book, but I eat it up when I go back to read now. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, especially knowing the Silmarillion now and knowing all that stuff that I read after I read the Lord of the Rings the first time as a kid. For those who don't know, I read the Lord of the Rings at 8 years old, so I didn't read the Silmarillion until I was like 11 or 12.
Oh, you slacker!
So, so in subsequent rereads into my teens and 20s, and now I'm in my 30s, the Council of Elrond now is probably there are other chapters I love in other ways. I love Helm's Deep because it's exciting, and I love some of the stuff towards the end of the Return of the King because it's so emotional. And but the Council of Elrond is just a beautiful piece of Tolkienism, because it's just you get mention of Tuor in there, and you get like Turin, and you get stuff from the Silmarillion just pushed in there, and you get this kind of analysis of Tom Bombadil, which I want to talk about in a minute.
I think the
we look
reason
back on him.
Part of the reason why I love reading the Council of Elrond so much, I think, is the fact that we get such a truncated version of it in the film. So I enjoy getting to really dive in there, and the fact that, you know, there's characters present, you know, that I miss in the movie. Like I love the fact that Gloin is there, and that Bilbo is present for the council, and yeah, especially once you read the Silmarillion and you go back and you're able to
even the Hobbit references actually in the Council of Elrond are great, because you mentioned Gloin. You get that bit where Legolas tells us about what happened with Gollum, and how the elves of Mirkwood kind of betrayed their charge of keeping him prisoner up there in Mirkwood, and Gloin says, you guys didn't treat me so, you know, graciously while I was in your prison. And you kind of, you get that subtext of the Hobbit in there.
Which, God, that just, it makes me so happy to think about that stuff, because it just, like, you know, so much has changed over the years in terms of like how I look at what Lord of the Rings and Tolkien is, because of the films and because of all the other books that I've now read. But it just, the feeling of like having started off with reading The Hobbit and then going into Lord of the Rings, and throughout this first book still getting, like, it's that mixture between it being a sequel to The Hobbit and turning into something much grander. But I just loved stuff like, you know, when Bilbo stands up at the council, and you know, and there's a reference to how Egwene looks at him, you know, and it's just like
when Bilbo puts himself forward to take the ring to Mount Doom, and there's loads of stuff going on in that pit, because you number one, you get the sense that Bilbo knows that this is probably Frodo's job, and he wants to save him from that fate, because he knows it's probably not going to turn out well. But then, you know, you also get the reverence that everybody has for Bilbo, apart from Boromir, who kind of has to stifle a little bit of a chuckle when that happens. But yeah, the cinema version works very, very well. You know, cinematically, there's stuff in there which I really like. The way that the ring is represented in the council, when it's first put down in the middle, and they all kind of stare at it, and the music shifts. It works really well, because you do get that sense of kind of fate playing out, I think, when that happens. Yeah,
I think that the council scene in the films is exactly what it needs to be. It's just, you know, as a book fan, you just can't help but be like, oh, but I wanted more of this and more of that. But yeah, I love, just the way that people respond to the ring, you know, and especially that moment when everybody gets up and starts arguing, and Frodo's just staring at the ring. You can see the influence it's having over everybody.
Another big change in that scene, I think, is Gandalf's reaction to Frodo putting himself forward. So in that argument scene, you get the kind of small voice of Frodo coming out, and nobody hears him the first time, and then Gandalf is the only one who hears it, and he sort of, it's wonderfully acted by Ian McKellen, but it's very different Gandalf to what we see in the books, because in the books you kind of get the sense that Gandalf knows, you know, before he even says it back in Bag End, you know, this might be your job to take it to Mount Doom. And by that time, by the council, you get the sense that he knows that this is Frodo's job.
Whereas in the films, like, there's a lot of stuff in Rivendell that is showing that he's like hoping to spare Frodo this, even to the point where he's having a conversation with Elrond, and it really, you know, if you want to be critical, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I know that it doesn't make sense, but it's just different.
this idea that he's hoping to leave, like that the ring will be safe in Rivendell, and the fact that Elrond has to say, Gandalf, the ring cannot stay here, and and so there's just like this feeling in the films that he hoped that would be enough, and that Frodo wouldn't have to go any further. And then in the council scene, we get this, acceptance. It's like, I think the filmmakers described it as like, a father, learning that, his son is going to have to be sent off to war. And
I think I've read before that Peter Jackson instructed Ian McKellen to act it as if that was what we.
And it is such a beautiful moment. I mean, just it tugs at your heartstrings just watching, Ian McKellen in that moment.
Yeah, I think every scene with Ian McKellen.
Oh yeah, that. Absolutely.
So other Fellowship of the Ring changes, I think.
Well, there is the Arwen of it all, which
right. Yeah, we skipped that, of course. Yeah.
Which it's interesting because the changes to Arwen in the first film hint towards the other changes like that they were going to make in the subsequent films, but they pulled back on a little bit.
That's right.
The Arwen that we see, riding out and taking Frodo, across the ford, that is very much the Arwen that would have
fought at Helm's Deep and
battle at Helm's Deep. But they pulled back on it, realizing that they could tell Arwen's story a different way that would be closer to Tolkien, and I'm glad that they did that. At the same time, there is a part of me that wants to see, like, as
I would have been intrigued to see that for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Arwen is in the book. She's kind of a little bit of an afterthought. She's a character that was written right at the end of the drafting process. Tolkien was like, I need to have Aragorn marry somebody now, and then he went back and wrote her in, which is why she feels like such a cardboard cutout of a character in the book.
Yeah, I remember, again, because I was reading the book while all the promotional material was coming out for the films, and so I knew that Liv Tyler played this character named Arwen, and I remember reading the book and being like, this character is barely in the story. And for someone who is such a, obviously an important, person to Aragorn, it felt weird. I remember reading the book and feeling like she was barely a presence. And so I am glad that they brought forward, like, material from the appendices and stuff and integrated her into the story, because I love her part in the story, and I really love Liv Tyler's work. I remember being really surprised by how great she was in the role. Not that she, I had really liked her and stuff. Like, she was in a film called That Thing You Do, which is actually one of my, it's a movie that I really loved.
I gotta go.
That's it. Guy Patterson. That's it, the Wonders. And then you know how, like, the Beatles, they use an EA as the Beatles? Well, we can use an ONE like the Wonders.
You're talking gibberish.
And of course, I'd seen Armageddon, which a lot of people have feelings about. But yeah, so I was very surprised at how she was able to convey this, quality, this ethereal quality of being this, older elf, which she always seems in a lot of her other roles from back to that time to be, very young as she was, but she conveyed so much playing Arwen. So I'm really glad they added material for her character and made her such a big part of the films.
I think they had to, didn't they?
Yeah.
There's a noticeable lack of female representation in the Lord of the Rings books.
Yeah.
Especially with a character like that, who is definitely a big part of events, but who doesn't really have any scenes in the books. You have to flesh that out more.
Yeah. And especially if you go and read the appendices, like she's a big part of Aragorn's story.
You're right.
Just unfortunately not like within the body of work that shows the events of Lord of the Rings, but in terms of Aragorn the character, she's very important, a very important part of that story. And so I absolutely feel like it was the right decision to bring her in and make her more of a presence. And again, like as you were just saying, the fact of the matter is time moves on. It may be not as surprising that with a story written in the late 40s, didn't have a huge amount of female presence, in a fantasy story. But yeah, in this day and age, it's absolutely something that they were going to have to do, and they should have done so.
For an adaptation, this is not a criticism of Tolkien. And then so other changes in sort of Moria, there are bits and pieces that are different. We don't get a wonderful scene from the book of Gandalf using the spell of locking the door, and then his will being overridden by the Balrog, and he's all flustered. Which I think is particularly dramatic in the books, because this is, I think, maybe only the second time in the history of Gandalf that we've seen him, afraid for his life. The first time being up a tree in The Hobbit, but we get the Balrog's entrance. But it's very much a battle of wills between Gandalf and the Balrog. I'd say in the books, whereas obviously it's a much more action movie-ish in the cinema version.
The Balrog scene is one of those that, like, every version is meshed together. So I'm probably not as much, but I will say, like, in the film version, they obviously add a lot more like action beats. Like, you've got that whole bridge sequence, which is nowhere to be found in the books, but I think it's awesome. I will say.
But the magic is more explicit, isn't it? It feels like magic spells happening, I think, in the cinema version, whereas it feels like a more of a spiritual battle, I'd say, in the books, which is that's getting back to where we started, which is the Lord of the Rings filmable in its purest form, because you can't really depict that very easily in cinema.
And
like same thing with the Nazgul, actually, because there's a change that we skipped over. We can't cover all the changes because there's too many. But there's the Weathertop scene in the Fellowship of the Ring. There's the change with Frodo resisting the ring wraiths in the book version, and he calls out the name of Elbereth, which my viewers might know as Varda from the Silmarillion. And Frodo calls that name out, and that's what actually drives the ring wraiths away in the book, is his kind of petition to the powers of Arda, to the Valar. And that's his will. That's his will rising up in the books. Whereas in the cinema version, it's kind of like Aragorn just comes in and takes them all on with a bit of wood and his sword.
I know that is a criticism that a lot of people have, that with both that and also at the Ford of Brunnen, that Frodo is weakened as a character because he doesn't get to stand on his own. And that great moment in the book where he says, you shall have neither the ring nor me, and it's this great moment. But I like, there's no reason why I think you couldn't include that stuff. I would think that it probably has more to do with like you've just introduced, with the scene on Weathertop, you've just introduced Aragorn, so you want to really give him like a big hero moment, to really introduce his character, and the fact that we don't really see that at all in the that moment in the books, because I think Frodo even, like, doesn't he pass out or
I think he does pass out after he's stabbed, I think. But he slashes at the Witch King with his sword as well in the books, which never happens in the film version. So there's that defiance there, and also, of course, his sword is deadly to the Witch King, and that's made clear in the books, which we don't know that from the movie version.
They get their
Aragorn conveniently just happens to have 4 hobbit-sized swords with him, and he's like, take these.
And they get those
which is from the Tom Bombadil section in the books. They get them from the Barrow Downs, which we never see.
Which also then plays into when Mary uses the sword to stab the Witch King. It gives like a reason as to why that blade is actually effective.
And when Frodo is in the unseen world, when he's in when he's got the ring on, he doesn't have the ring on, but he's fading because he's been stabbed by the Morgul blade. In the scene in the ford, he sees like a kind of red aura around the swords of the Dunedain, which were from the Barrow Downs, from the Kingdom of Arnor.
Yeah.
And so he can see that magic. He can see what the wraiths would see, and he see the reading of that is that's why the Nazgul are so afraid of those weapons, because they were bound with spells for their doom, basically.
But yeah, that is kind of funny. It's just, once again, it's a matter of expediency. It's like, okay, we didn't have the hobbits go through the old forest. How can we get them these swords? Oh, Aragorn will have them.
There's a few different ideas that you could put in there, and they're all equally kind of convenient, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
I suppose you could argue it's convenient that Tom Bombadil found a bunch of swords in a barrow, to be honest, but
I will say, as transition from one film to the next, one of the big differences is the way things play out at the end of the first film versus the book, where you have Boromir's death and this huge big battle scene with all the orcs and stuff. And in the book, it's like you don't even really see a battle. It's you come back to find Boromir laying there with and arrows stuck in him, and so a lot of it happens off screen.
Right.
But you can perfectly understand why they'd want to have a big climactic battle scene at the end of the first film, and also have Boromir die at the end of film 1 versus in the opening minutes of film 2, because it'd be much more dramatically satisfying. And Boromir is one of the great achievements of the films, in my opinion, just the way they wrote his character and the way Sean Bean plays him. He's so much more sympathetic in the films than what we get in the books.
Yeah, there's an arrogance to book Boromir, and a kind of I guess parochialism as well, where he doesn't kind of see outside of the borders of Gondor very often. There was a joke I saw online somewhere where somebody drew like Boromir's map of the world, and it was just Gondor everywhere, and the Anduin was called like the River of Gondor, and so different characters. I think they do a lot with very little with Boromir in the films. We get the scene where the hobbits are practicing their swordplay with him, and it's just, it works really well, not only because it leads into the scene with the Crabine, but it sort of gives us a sense of who this guy is, which I love. Yeah, and Sean Bean is wonderful.
Sean Bean is just, I can't say enough about him. I mean, it's easy to just say that, obviously Ian McKellen is especially of this first film, just such a powerhouse, but I'd be lying if I said that Sean Bean wasn't my his Boromir wasn't my favorite performance of this first film, because I think just everything that he added to it, and then those closing moments of the film where he was like, I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king.
And there's your
It's-
Aragorn's hero's journey as well,
Yeah.
because he's starting to believe it now that somebody else does. And you see that he takes the Vembraces from Boromir, which is a little detail that you see on rewatches. You get that kind of quick little bit of character growth through that little pastiche.
Yeah, which I missed so many times until somebody pointed it out to me, and I was like, "Oh yeah!" And it's it is funny though, because I think it's either on the commentary or somewhere else, somebody says, Aragorn being a bit of a grave robber there, isn't he?
Yeah.
But no, I think it's a very important, character growth moment that he's taking, he's carrying Boromir with him, and and it is a very important part of his journey moving forward. And yeah, I just love that the character has that much of an impact. And they managed to do it without sacrificing who Boromir, is in the book, because he does have that arrogance of book Boromir. I think one of my favorite lines of his, because it feels so much like book Boromir, is when back at the council, when he says, if this is the will of the council, then Gondor will see it done. That feels so book Boromir. And so, yeah, but it's brilliant the way they do it. And in the book, he dies in the opening moments of the second book, which is fine, because really it's just one large, The Lord of the Rings is a single novel. So it's basically just the next chapter.
It's one book. One novel in 6 books in 3 volumes. I guess we could talk about the changes with the Ents. We've bound to have a few Ent fans watching this.
And there are some changes there, aren't there? Which I completely sympathize with disgruntled Ent fans on a couple of those changes, because once again, it's all about expediency. And I mean, we can dive right into the Pippin of it all, I guess. The fact that he tricked Treebeard into going to war, which is absolutely not a thing of the books.
No.
Which they do to give Pippin a moment, but I would definitely agree that it sacrifices Treebeard's intelligence on that score. So
a little, yeah. Also, this is another Dan logic moment for you. All right, the scene when they end up in the kind of the part of the forest that's been chopped down by the orcs, and Treebeard is like, many of these trees are my friends, and then he lets out this howl. The howl is great. I'd love that, because it's just you do get the sense of him being this ancient creature, and you get a sense of his kind of power and nobility through that kind of otherworldly noise that he makes. And then Ents instantly appear from behind the trees, that just a few maybe 100 yards away.
It makes no sense.
And you think, why did they not realize that this was happening if all of these Ents were right there? But I guess it's kind of like a montage kind of thing that they're going for there in a way, but it doesn't really work visually for me.
I've always the only way I've been
it might be an editing issue, maybe.
No, the only way I've actually been able to rationalize it over the years is that there's some kind of magic involved, that his howl kind of summons them there, and they just kind of appear, because it doesn't really make sense otherwise. It's one of those things we need the Ents to get there really fast. Okay, we'll just have them there. As I said, I unconditionally love these films, and I think they're brilliant, but there are definite moments where there's lapses in logic.
Yeah.
And this is one of the big ones. It's an effective moment, just the way it's, the music and, everything like that that theme by Howard Shore, the nature theme is, oh my God, it's so beautiful and brilliant. And then the way Treebeard says,
yeah, it's one of my favorite themes. That
and come, my friends, and just we're marching to Isengard. I'm trying to remember. How do I not remember the exact lines? I've seen this movie a million times. But yeah, there's no question that doesn't quite make sense that they're all there all of a sudden.
No.
So I'm not going to try to excuse that one.
I thought maybe you'd have a rationalization for me. I don't think we've ever talked about it. We don't think it came up when we did the live streams. Maybe it did.
No,
maybe,
yeah, magic. Magic is the only possible rationalization I could come up with.
It is a similar moment to Gandalf's summoning of Shadowfax in some ways, which does feel like very deliberate.
Which is also a difference in of itself. A difference because Shadowfax in the films is, Gandalf calls him the Lord of all horses, which is not really as if they have like some kind of like parliament or something, like the horse like politics that they have or something. Yeah, Shadowfax is, one of the horses, one of the Meras, which belong to the Rohirrim, and there's a whole history about that.
The lore behind the Meras is that they're descended from Orome's horse, Nahar, and they're connected through the lore to the Silmarillion there. Here's some of his horses came across from Aman thousands of years prior, and then they kind of were up there in the north, and that horse is descended from El the Young's horse. So Shadowfax is descended in a direct line from, I can't remember the name of El the Young's horse, but that's the backstory there.
Yeah, and so in the films, Shadowfax is more of like this mythical horse that,
Yeah, he's like a Pegasus without the wings,
Which again, simplification, just,
I always pictured Shadowfax grey as well. The name means grey hair, I think, more or less, or shadowy hair in Old English.
That's interesting. I always pictured Shadowfax. You know what? I know why I always pictured.
Is it an illustration?
Yeah, although I guess he does look kind of grayish.
Well, I mean, horse people always tell me when I've brought this thing up with and I have brought this up with horse people before, is that actually white horses don't really exist. White horses are just grey horses that have gone white. Like humans go white with old age.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the reason why I was okay with it was probably because, again, just because of the close proximity of when I read the books to seeing the films. I think there were probably images of Shadowfax going around and stuff. So I never really questioned it. But yeah, it's so funny because now I'm looking at this is actually, while these are not the actual books that I originally bought, these are the same editions. It's this image of, there's a bit of a glare, but Gandalf riding on Shadowfax. And now that you mention it, there is you could call that grayish. But
I would, I can't really see it, but it looks great.
But it's funny that I always just assumed that it was more white. It's funny, but yeah, no, I mean it works in the film, but there's so much more to Shadowfax and the Meras in the books than it's just he's Gandalf's old friend.
Yeah.
in the movies.
Yeah. In the books, he has only met him fairly recently. This is something from the first book, or the first volume, I should say, from Fellowship, which was cut, was his escape from Orthanc, which in the books involves an extra step of going to Rohan first, and then the king, basically gets rid of him. Under the ministrations of Wormtongue, who doesn't want him there, and
which And actually,
tells him take any horse you like, and so Gandalf takes Shadowfax.
And actually, for anybody who's listened to the absolutely marvelous BBC radio drama version, they actually include that scene, chronologically, after Gwaihir rescues Gandalf and he takes him to Rohan, and so you get that exchange with Gandalf, Theoden, Wormtongue, and where he gets Shadowfax.
That's interesting. I see. I have listened to that, but not for a very long time. Should maybe do some content on that. It'd be interesting. But I don't really
please!
Think I'll have the time.
Yeah. If you do, bring me on for it because I love that adaptation. I've listened to it so many times that actually I have a really hard time letting go of those voices when I read the book, which it could be a good or a bad thing. But yeah, it's a great production. I actually have the older 13 disc set, which has I think newer versions of that radio play like combine it all into like it's all like you have the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and Return of the King, whereas the older versions were divided up into 13 episodes.
Yeah, I think it's a contender for one of the most quote unquote faithful adaptations of the books, for sure.
Yeah, it has the Scouring of the Shire. So
right, is that a hint that we should move on? So, I mean, are there any other Two Towers changes that you want to cover? Because I think I've covered at various points in this kind of meandering conversation most of them. But...
yeah, because the big thing was we talked about Faramir. I guess the other, like, something I would like to touch on lightly is not so much a difference in, like, content, but in the way it's shown. Like, for instance, as far as Two Towers goes, Theoden's transformation and also this kind of goes back to a couple other points in the story, like even with Galadriel's temptation in Fellowship, where they took these things to the extreme and then to show them in ways visually that weren't the same in the book. Like for Theoden, the spell he's under literally has him like transformed into this very old, decrepit, haggard.
And then it switches to Faramir, and it's kind of possessing him,
Yeah, and then he magically becomes younger, whereas in the book it's more of a, in his head where, he needs to just stand up straight and he'll be his old self. So they really took it to an extreme, and yeah, Saruman is possessing him, which is not a, such a literal thing in the book.
No.
Which once again, so we can have this great, like, really action-oriented moment where Gandalf is, casting Saruman out of the Theoden.
Yeah, this is like an exorcism that he does, isn't it?
Yeah.
Essentially.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
Yeah, so that stuff is different where I think no one ever claimed that Peter Jackson's strong suit is subtlety.
No.
I think you can attribute a lot of the subtlety in Lord of the Rings to Fran Walsh and Philip Boyens probably, and Peter Jackson was more, the big visual ideas, and that's certainly evident in stuff like that.
That seems to be borne out by the commentaries and everything we've heard over the years.
My favorite bit of the commentaries on like that is in Return of the King, when you get to that the extended cut, the scene with the Corsairs, and when Peter Jackson in his cameo, and pretty much all the behind the scenes people are having their cameos in that moment, and in the commentary he says, yeah, a lot of the people were there making their cameos, and he says to Philippa and Fran, oh, where were you guys on this day? And one of them says, we were trying to save the movie.
Two Towers changes. So yeah, I guess the only other one that I would talk about a little bit is the Battle of Helm's Deep, which is is a large portion of the film,
and it's only one chapter in the book.
The sheer length of it is probably the biggest change, if anything.
Which is why the fact that it's funny because I remember hearing Peter Jackson talk about the fact that they couldn't have certain things that like occur in the Two Towers as part of the movie because you couldn't have like Frodo battling Shelob and going through all that at the same time that the Battle of Helm's Deep is going because it would be a clash of like too many like emotional action climaxes.
Chronologically, that actually makes sense as well, though, because I know that they are both in the Two Towers volume, but actually
chronologically
there's some overlap there where some things bleed into the chronology of different books. So
chronologically, actually, the way they did it made sense, but also like you could editorially make those things work if Helm's Deep was proportionately what it is in the book. But the fact that they made it such, the centerpiece of the second film means that, I agree. You couldn't have the climax of what Frodo goes through in Shelob's lair at the same time, which is, of course,
who would want to shorten Helm's Deep? I mean, that's just crazy talk.
And really, I think it's one of, it is like one of the greatest cinematic battles ever, and it's not.
I think it is the greatest, John. I can't think of another candidate, honestly. I mean, maybe you can think of a few. Like, I've seen a few war movies in my time. Actually, it's a genre that I do enjoy. But
I was just wanting to be fair to other films, but I would agree with that. But and the thing that's so great about it is it's not just the battle itself, but it's the build up to the battle and how they just keep cranking the tension until the battle finally unleashes. So and of course the fact that it's such a big piece of that film is also the reason for the other change of the film that you have to give, because we're not going to deal with Shelob's lair. You have to give Frodo and Sam some drama in that later part of the film, which is why they're diverted to Osgiliath.
It's cool to see Osgiliath up close, isn't it?
Yeah, which of course is not in the book, and of course one of my favorite jokes from fans was always that there's a moment where Sam says, "By rights we shouldn't even be here," and the fan base is going, "Yeah, you're not supposed to be." No,
that is true. I think that actually works though, because you have to have the hobbits do something. The Frodo and Sam story, you have to have them doing something.
I think it really does serve a really good purpose because it allows us to see what's going on in Osgiliath, and it allows that part of the story to be explored in a way that at least in the books we don't get until Return of the King. So I think it's they make the most of it. So
tiny scene in Helm's Deep, in the build up to Helm's Deep, that doesn't quite. It's not quite a Dan Logic moment, but it is something that does make me scratch my head a little. Is the scene where Aragorn is I think he's like milling around outside the keep, and there's a kid there, and as this kid is looking sheepish, like he's like he's scared for his life, which he should be. No problems there. It works because it humanizes Aragorn and gives us this nice character moment with him. But he has this line and he says, "This is a good sword," and he's wheeling this sword around, and then you look at the sword and you think, that doesn't look like a good sword to me. It looks like a really awful rusty sword.
Yeah, I think that
looks like a piece of tinfoil, Aragorn. Have you seen the sword?
I think in the moment it's to give hope to the kid. You're not going to say to the kid, "This is a pretty shitty sword. You're screwed."
Yeah. You're not going to kill many orcs with this. I think you should probably run for your life. That kid probably we don't see him again. don't know if he made it, but
Yeah, and well, the interesting thing is that he says that his name is Haleth, son of Hama, who we actually see get killed earlier in the film.
do we?
Yep, he's the one
character is that?
who gets eaten by the ward.
Okay, all right, okay. I didn't realize that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and also I believe that's Phil Boyan's son.
Right. Yeah, I imagined it would be one of the kids of one of the filmmakers. Yeah. Cool.
But I love that moment just because it leads into like one of the all-time great hero moments. There was always hope, and then cut to him putting on the armor. It's like.
Yeah. And the comedy moment of Gimli putting his mail on as well.
Which, by the way, and that always cracks me up. It's like he actually gets that squared away pretty quickly because like it doesn't fit at all, and then they're running out to see the elves, and he's got it all figured out. There's some editing trickery going on there.
Yeah, he certainly seems agile enough after a while, doesn't he, Gimli?
Yeah.
The whole thing of keeping score of their kill count during the battle is direct from the books. I'm glad they kept that kind of bromance between him and Legolas. I think that's actually key to their dynamic in that book anyway.
Yeah, I think there's some question of like whether that count is still accurate with as many times as we see Legolas firing those arrows. But I do nonetheless love that they kept it anyway, because it is a really fun part of the book.
Okay, let's do Return of the King. There's two big ones that I want to cover, and they're both, well, one of them's halfway through the film and one of them's something that's missing at the end, which you know what that is. But the big one that I always kind of, I dislike it, the change in the film, is the Stairs of Cirith Ungol, and the fact that Gollum convinces Frodo to basically abandon Sam and tell him to go home. And what that does to those two characters and how it changes their story.
And I think we did talk about this right on the stream, because I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that you understand the reason for it and the fact that it isolates Frodo is good, but that it's just the reasoning and how it gets there doesn't quite work for you. Am I right in that, or do you not like any of it?
I don't know. I mean, it makes Frodo seem gullible. I think is the effect that it has. And again, this is the ring taking its effect on him to a much greater extent than what it does in the books. Not that the book doesn't make it clear that the ring is powerful and is affecting Frodo and so on, but Frodo's resisting it, and he's certainly not abandoning Sam. And also Sam is abandoning Frodo in that moment. Book Sam follows Frodo anyway. He doesn't start going back down and then find some lembas on the floor and then get angry and start going back. He tails Frodo anyway, because he doesn't abandon his master. And I think honestly it's a little out of character for movie Sam, because movie Sam certainly does still have that same loyalty and that same attachment to his master. I don't know. I don't remember what I said on the stream, but that's how I feel today.
Yeah, well, I actually don't believe that Sam would have actually gotten very far before he turned back, regardless of the bread or not. Because actually, editorially, if you're watching it, like, for him to still even be sort of that close, he has to have been just basically sitting there and not moving at all. I think he's sort of in despair at that moment, and I don't think it's the fact that he sees the bread and he's like, oh, aha, I know what's going on now. I think it doesn't really tell him.
No, I think Sam
more.
I think Sam knows what's going on.
I think it's just the thing that gets him to turn back at that particular moment. But I don't think, just because of Sam's character, I don't think he would have gotten that far before he turned back anyway. I don't see any situation in which he would have actually gone home. But
can you imagine? He just starts his journey back home in that moment, and it's like, you know, it's hundreds and hundreds of miles. He's just like, okay, I'll go home, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that moment. I think like I like, and it's funny because I was saying that maybe you had been saying this on the stream, but maybe it's just sort of my internal voice, you know, saying what I was thinking. I actually really like that it separates them, because I think dramatically that's very effective. Because
I think that's the reason for that scene,
yeah.
You know, to separate.
And you know, the fact that Frodo's all on his own, and it makes like Shelob's lair that much more terrifying. And you got you know, Gollum's voice in the background, and you know, you will see, and then you get that great moment of when Sam shows up, and it's actually Peter Jackson's hand that enters the frame holding Sting. I always think that's funny, but it's a great hero moment. And I do actually believe that Frodo could be driven to like believing that because of the just because of what the ring's doing to him. That said, I would like say it's completely valid to have issues with it, because it seems like they're really pushing it to an extreme to just separate them. You know, there is something about it that, and maybe it's because I know it wasn't that way in the book, but there is something that feels a bit too like we've got to make this happen because this is where we want these characters to separate. So
the mechanics of the plot, so it needs to happen. Yeah.
So I kind of like, on the one hand, I like what it does, but I can see the issues with it, and maybe it is a bit too much of it's going to happen because it needs to happen. So yeah. So I'd say I'm kind of mixed on it overall, but again, it's beautifully, like I think even when there's points in these films where I disagree with like adaptation changes and character motivations, I think the performances come in and kind of you know, really sell those moments, because I think what Elijah Wood and Sean Astin do is just beautiful in those moments, and it sells it.
Yeah, I think Smeagol's performance as well. I think the kind of creepy way that he goes about doing that, all that, it works from a performance point of view, for sure.
Just love that moment where Gollum's like, you know, he's acting all innocent.
That kind of innocent face that he puts on, gives it the old poppy dog eyes.
Yeah.
So 2 more changes I want to cover in Return of the King, and then we'll move on, I think. The Army of the Dead stuff is quite different.
It's really different. And
in the books, there's a much larger group of people that go on that journey. So in the books, the Grey Company, which is Aragorn's, you know, extended family of the Dunedain Rangers, led by Halbarad, turn up when they're at Don Harrow, I think, in the books, and so basically they turn up actually instead of Elrond in the books, and so there's a much larger group that go through that, and that whole part of the story is told retrospectively after the Battle of Pelennor Fields. And then in the books, the Army of the Dead go down to south to the docks at Pelargir. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but don't go to the Battle of Pelennor Fields. So it's actually just, you know, living people that show up to save the day in the book version.
This is so complicated, and like I constantly go back and forth as to whether I think that they made the right call in this, because on the one hand, I do think it sort of diminishes, I very much liked the Battle of Pelennor Fields more in the books, just because when you've got, because in the movie it's like you've got this, what's basically a magical force shows up to to immediately win everything, and so it just makes it all feel like if they could have just shown up earlier, everybody would have been fine.
Yeah,
But
a lot of lives would have been saved if they had just gotten there an hour or two earlier.
But on the other hand, in a film, especially a fantasy film, can you really get away with introducing this army of the dead that all they do is take these ships and then they're out of the story? They don't fulfill any more function. Like Tolkien fans would say, yes, that's the way it's supposed to be. But I think movie audience would have been like, what the hell? They should have just used those guys for the main battle.
Yeah, that would be the new, why don't they take the Eagles to Mount Doom?
Yeah.
Plot hole, if they'd have done that.
So, yeah, I'm mixed on it myself, and I certainly get why people take issue with it, because I think if it's just like mortal human forces that show up at the battle, it gives greater weight to the victory and to the sacrifices that were made. And so yeah, works for the film. I'm undecided as to whether I would have liked it the book way or not.
They do almost actually play with the plot hole kind of thing a little bit with the hilarious line, the Gimli line afterwards, where he says, the King of the Dead says, you gave us your word, you have to free us now, and Gimli's like, bad idea.
Very handy in a tight spot, these lads.
Very handy in a tight spot. Yeah.
Yeah, and so just by having Gimli raise the question, like, and then have Aragorn, that it's a matter of honor, he's going to keep his word and all that, and so that solves the problem of of that lingering question of a plot hole. So I actually do think that works. It's basically, it's a way to have them show up for Pelennor Fields, but not have the audience asking, well, why didn't they just stay for for the final battle too? So yeah, I again, I think it works, but it's not without, like, it's just tricky.
Honestly, I think it works pretty well. Like, because for me, it gets a tick. The only thing that I'm missing is the Grey Company, personally. Okay. But those are just characters that are cut, side characters that we don't have room for. Like, we don't have room for Prince Imrahil, and we don't have room for other characters that are cut from that whole sequence. But
yeah, and that's really the big reason why they need to use the filmmakers need to use the Army of the Dead for that, because you can't possibly bring in all those other characters at that point in the story.
Right.
It's just not going to work.
And so finally, in Return of the King, the last thing that we have to cover is the Scouring of the Shire, and you knew this was coming. Big noticeable absence that I think you can certainly forgive them for it, because this is a movie that many people have said to me feels like it has about 10 different endings. The short version of it is well over 3 hours long, and the long version of it is well over 4, if I've got that correct, running time wise.
Yeah, I think it's 4 hours and 10 minutes.
Right.
Not that long. It's pretty brief.
Yeah, I mean, I could watch 8 hours of Return of the King quite comfortably, with the ability to take toilet breaks, so no problems. But
especially like, and I always do look at these films nowadays as just one long film, and I've actually sat down and done a marathon of all the films, and it's like once you've gotten to the 11th hour, what's another what would be another?
Well, you're basically moving into that world at that point, so it's like once you get to the 11th hour, you're like, is there a real world left anymore, or am I just, am I moving into Middle Earth at this point?
But that said, the way these films were released and intended to be seen by audiences was, even, as we said, the theatrical version of this was 3 hours and 20 minutes already, a very long film for, at the time, modern audiences. I absolutely think they made the right decision removing the Scouring of the Shire. I don't think it would have worked because the climax of these stories, is the destruction of the ring. And like the movie already goes on for long enough after. I love the ending of this film. I was like so annoyed by all the talk about multiple endings and all that. I was like, shut up. But
I agree.
But yeah, but that said, like, I don't see how the film could have continued to go on and opened up like once you've resolved the ring, how you then like have the scene at Minas Tirith and all the emotions that go there, and then have them travel home, and then oh no, we're taking a left turn, whole new plot is starting up. I just don't think they could have done it.
It's very unlike the stuff that they miss out in Fellowship of the Ring, in that I think it's said in the commentaries at one point, or maybe in the documentaries, in the Old Forest and the Tom Bombadil and the Barrow Downs, all those chapters that they skip. I think it's either Fran or Philippa points out that those things could have happened. We just we skipped and you didn't see them. They happened off camera, off screen. It's very unlike that, because we do see them come back to the Shire, and the Shire hasn't changed, and they have. And they ride in their mail on their horses, or I guess their ponies, looking all princely and whatnot. And they've changed and the Shire hasn't, whereas it's very, very different in the book. Shire's completely changed, and so have they. But it's the results, it's the measurable results of their character growth that they can come back and set things right.
Yeah, and you get that great moment where they're all sitting in the Green Dragon and just sitting there in silence, and there's just this feeling of they're back home, everything's as it was, but they've changed so much, and that's like something that you couldn't have if they came back to the Shire and everything had been uprooted and changed. And
I think what you possibly are missing in the cinematic version that we've got, is Frodo's change is more pronounced in a different direction than the other characters. Sam has grown, as in he's grown into a hero, and he's become wiser, and he's become this great hero and elf friend, renowned. And the Merry and Pippin have become soldiers of Gondor and Rohan, and we kind of get that in the film version. But the very different change of Frodo and the kind of spiritual wound that he has, I don't think is kind of clear as it is in the book version.
That's interesting. I don't know that I agree with that.
The reason I say that is because Frodo in the Scouring of the Shire says, I think he says to the other hobbits, well, he's trying to stop any killings happening. He's trying to stop them from killing even the men, let alone the hobbits that are fighting on the other side, who most of them quickly turn their coats anyway. So no hobbits are harmed in the Scouring of the Shire. But it's clear that he's become a pacifist anyway, is what I'm saying, and it's clear that it's a spiritual change in him. And it's, I don't know, you just get this really palpable sense of how much he's changed and how different he is, which I don't know that I got that in the film version. We get the sense that his shoulder is never fully healed, because he says it.
I think for me, it's what really sells sort of what he's gone through is the line, because he is talking about his shoulder, but he says, there are some wounds that time cannot mend, some hurts that go too deep that have taken hold.
Yeah,
I think he's both.
I know the line you're talking about.
I think you can see that
my criticism of that is it's like your high school English teacher used to tell you, or maybe your science fiction teacher used to tell you in your case, of show don't tell, and that's what the book has, in that ending that we get.
Yeah, I think it comes across. I think the emotional turmoil and and pain that he's gone through, I do think it's conveyed in the film. But but that's also always going to be the way of it. That you're always going to be able to convey like internal, thoughts and feelings in a book.
I'm not saying it's not there, but it's just not quite as. It doesn't feel as deep and fundamental as the change in Frodo in the book. But then there's the matter of perspectives and the narrative being directly from Frodo's point of view and so on, and it's just it's the difference between a written medium and a visual one.
I think a lot of it, I think the change is conveyed in a different way. Partly because the Scouring of the Shire isn't there, and so you're not getting that demonstration of maybe how he views things in that way. But I do think that the film conveys a lot of his emotional pain and the fact that he can't, he's forever changed. He can't be the Hobbit that he was. So in my opinion, that is conveyed. But yeah, it just might be in a different way than what the book was.
Sure, fair enough. So agree to disagree on that, or at least agree to different points of view on it. Cool.
I will say one of the things I love is that we've talked about a lot of changes of the books, but it's it's always been very important to me, and I'm very happy about the fact that these films end as the book ends, with Sam going, "Well, I'm back."
Yeah.
I think that's very important, that even if they take liberties throughout, that they have the same end point.
Agreed. Yeah. I really like that they kept that. Actually, that's the one thing that I always say to people who talk about the multiple endings feeling that they have at the end of Return of the King, is you need to have that final scene of Sam coming back. You need to.
Yeah.
Because
they could have ended it with fading to white at the Grey Havens. There's actually no, from a movie making standpoint, there's no reason you couldn't just go to the credits at that point. But I think it was really important to them to end the story as Tolkien ends it, and I'm really happy they made that decision.
There are people who want the movies to end on the slopes of Mount Doom, like immediately after the ring has gone in the fire. And to those people, I
actually do.
I don't care how much you need the bathroom at that point. You have to get the kind of.
Well, I think you could argue that that's actually the end of You could argue that that's the ending of the third film, and what comes after is the ending of the Lord of the Rings as a full story. And although I don't know, you kind of need the scene after that, because for it to be the ending of Return of the King, you actually do need to see Aragorn's coronation.
King, yeah.
But I've always looked at it as this is you can't just quickly wrap up, a 9.5 or 11.5 hour movie, just by cutting to the credits as quickly as possible. You need to allow the characters and the story to fully resolve. And again, if you don't, I would point people towards the book. It's if you think that the ending of the films goes on for a while, read the book and you'll have a different perspective on it.
We get another little mini war at the end of the War of the Ring.
Yeah.
I love the Scouring of the Shire. I think it's really charming, is the word I'd use for it, because it's you get the hobbits roused enough, and they will go to war, and they will defend themselves, and I love that. The hobbits, the ordinary hobbits that are in the background in the films, the extras that we see, you don't really get a sense of who they are. You just get a sense of like where the Shire is, which you get that really clearly. The idyllic pastoral beauty of the Shire, it comes across really well in film. But you don't get characters like Rosie Cotton's father, Farmer Cotton, is he called? Or I don't remember his name, but you get characters like that who just, you get a sense of who they are, and I don't know. I might cut this out because I don't really know whether I'm getting to a point here or not. But
no, don't cut it out, because this is great. I will say that I do really like the Scouring of the Shire too. Although I'll admit, the first time I read the books, I was like, this is unusual. The main plot of the story was resolved, but here we have this whole different thing. But I think it does work because, again, the pace of the books is more deliberate than what you're getting with a film, and we spend a lot of time, like early on in Fellowship of the Ring, with the hobbits, and and getting a sense of the society of the Shire and all this stuff, and really taking time with these individual character journeys. And so I think the Scouring of the Shire is kind of brilliant in the way that it brings the story back to the Shire and shows like the horrors of war, and that it can be carried home, and so I do think it works. I just don't think that there's any possible way they could have made that work in a theatrical film. I actually think they could make it work if they did a mini series of adaptation of the Lord of the Rings.
Yes. It's been said before on my channel that the Lord of the Rings should be adapted into 6 seasons of television, 1 per book. The Corey Olsen interview that we did back in December. And I'd have to agree with that, honestly. The more I think about adaptation and the difficulty of adapting the Lord of the Rings.
I'm of two minds about it, because I'm very hesitant.
Because you love these movies.
I love these movies so much, and I think that I think I've stated over the course of this discussion that I have like little quibbles, with a couple of things, but on the whole, I mean, they remain my favorite films of all time, and I think they're so utterly brilliant. So I don't want to see anything try and touch these films, because I think that they're just classics. But on the other hand, I have to admit, as this Tolkien fan, there are things you could do with that format that that can't be done with like 3 movies. So it would be interesting to see. So I'd begrudgingly be like, all right, I'll watch it.
Yeah, my perspective is, if it turns out to be bad, we still have the books. But I do hear the argument that it would maybe ruin the kind of legacy of the films if there was a bad adaptation made that doesn't work out, I suppose.
Well, they survived The Hobbit, so.
Let's try and wrap things up for now. Okay. Tell the people where they can find you, and do you have anything coming out on your channel?
Yeah, you can find me first of all on my channel on John Webster Film, I suppose by the time you all see this, it'll have already aired. I'm getting ready to do a discussion with Lady Triple and her husband Brian, as I like to call him, Mr. Lady Triple, about the next few episodes of the Star Wars animated show, The Bad Batch. So go ahead and run over my channel and
so good, by the way.
Oh my god, I'm so in love with it because I was such a huge fan of the Clone Wars, and this is just like picking up right where that left off. And also I'm on a co-host on Here Be Dragons, so check us out over there. We talk about nerdy stuff. So.
And I've been on both channels many times, or several times, I suppose. And we've had some fun talking Tolkien on your channel, and talked Tolkien on. I've talked Tolkien on Here Be Dragons once or twice as well.
Yeah, it's again, we have to mention, like, hop over to my channel, John Webster Film, and check out not only our 3 discussions on the Lord of the Rings films, which we had with a couple of other people. We had Helm, the Clueless Fangirl, Carol Brown, my good friend Aaron, and my co-host, who unfortunately is having to leave the channel, but she was with us. Amy Blackfire was with us for those, and we just had a blast. But also we have a discussion on the animated Hobbit film, which which was its own brand of fun.
Yeah, that came up on my last podcast. My guest, not Kelly, but the other guest that we had on, talked about doing some content on the animated Hobbit. So we told him about that stream.
Oh yeah, and Kelly was on for at least one of our streams as well. So.
Yeah, she was on Return of the King, if I'm remembering correctly. Cool. All right, great. Thanks so much for coming on, John.
Thank you for having me on. This is great.